Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Seahawks fans, welcome to the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers. We're here to talk Seahawks football, training camp, storylines, all that good stuff. Welcome into the show, Keith. Good to have you again.
Yeah, it's there's practices. We're actually watching football. Sometimes during the off season, it feels like we're never going to get here, but here we are.
True, right? I mean, this whole process lasts 6 months, and we don't treat it really anything different. It's like there's always something fun for us, but for listeners, it's like people kind of check out for a while. Sometimes that's what you need to do to kind of recoup after a season. Then you come back this time of the year and you're all kind of fired up. So it's a good time to get back and jump into it when all the players end up walking into camp. The energy level is up. Fans are back on the berm. And it's a great time to be a fan and a Seahawk fan. So Keith and I are going to talk some football today. We've got news in the NFC West that we wanted to talk about. We've got some storylines specific to training camp and some Jamal Adams contract stuff, and we'll try to put it all together for you. So what's going on in the NFC West that we're trying to pay attention to a little bit that might have a big impact on the team this year?
Well, the biggest thing is that the Rams, who are probably the biggest competition that the Seahawks have for the division, just lost a huge piece of their offense. Their running back, Cam Akers, is out, torn Achilles. He'll miss the entire year. And, that's a big deal. So, we're looking at they're going to be scrambling, trying to figure out what to do with that portion of their offense, because last year they had like a three-headed monster, right? They had three guys in the position. Akers started out the year as the third guy in that, worked his way up the depth chart. By the end, he was the starter. He was getting the lion's share of the carries. He's the more talented back, but he was a rookie and they brought him along slowly, which was probably the right thing for them to do. One of their running backs left. I think he's in Miami now. The other one, is now got a torn Achilles. So they're really left with Henderson as their only back. And he's not a guy that is built to run between the tackles. He excelled in that by committee approach because it allowed them to use him where he's effective and not ask him to do everything. And suddenly he has to do everything. So it is definitely worth watching. Yeah,
I think that they're going to go out and probably acquire a few players, bring a couple of young guys, undrafted guys into camp for competition, take some workload. And then it wouldn't surprise me if a guy like Adrian Peterson, who's still available out there, who's waiting for an opportunity, wants to go to a Super Bowl contender, would come in and try to help them, at least maybe give them, 100 to 150 carries in a season, pick up 500 yards, a few touchdowns, and it would help that running back room, I think, having a veteran presence like that. It's not like I want them to be successful at doing this. I just think that that's probably what they would try to do. Or Frank Gore, who's completely ancient right now. He's got petrified wood for feet, but he can still move. And it's a remarkable career for Frank Gore. 18 years if he would to play this year. He would be the oldest running back in the history of the NFL to ever have a carry in a game if he played. And I think that you could pick those guys up for minimum, and I would expect them to at least have one guy like that in camp too. So you're right. That's a huge impact for the NFC West in total, because the Rams were going to be right up there. Everyone's kind of saying they're the best team in the division. I'm kind of questioning that. I think the Seahawks are right up there as well. And the 49ers, of course. We'll see what happens there. But this injury
it's hard
is
for
huge.
them to compete with their quarterback situation. That's why I don't consider them up there with the Seahawks.
But
and
you know,
Rams,
at the same time, Keith, Garoppolo did take them to a Super Bowl as just a game manager.
That's true. I mean, the rest of the roster is not as good as it was that year, but you're right. They did get there with him managing games. I just don't. He has shown in his time in San Francisco that he's not.
Well, he's not going to
franchise
go
quarterback.
win games for you. That's their thing. But what if they made it through week 8 with Garoppolo, made the switch and transitioned, and Lance came on? I don't know. I think it might be one of those wasted years, just to get their quarterback developed a little bit. But we'll see.
I mean, that's one of the things that if you look back to 2012, that's what the Seahawks did is, they brought Russell Wilson along, and the first 6 games were really rough and they were tough, but they got him acclimated to the NFL so that in 2013 they could go win a Super Bowl. And I don't think so. The 49ers roster is not as good as it was when they were in the Super Bowl with Garoppolo. And I don't think they're getting there with a game manager this year, but they've got Lance, who has this incredibly high ceiling and could be a great player. They've got to get him in and get him acclimated to the NFL, and then they can make a run next year. They're going to be really dangerous once they get him up to speed.
Yeah, when you get that young quarterback and a really good roster and a good coach. I mean, he really is a good coach.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll have to definitely pay attention again. Cardinals, just a little brief news. Chandler Jones holding out, wants a new contract, is open to being traded. So that issue could be a development for them. They were going to be right on the cusp anyway, kind of a 9-win team that could go to 10 or 11, could also fall just slightly. And Chandler Jones, I don't know. It's tough because he missed some time last year as well, but it just seems like they have just somewhat of a incomplete roster, but it's really close. Like, I don't think that you could discount them. And on any given Sunday, as they say, they could go steal a few games. So it's something to pay attention to.
Well, I mean, and then they've got their quarterback who is a budding star. And anytime you got a quarterback, you're dangerous. But, their defense has holes. Their offensive line's weak. Their defense has holes. And then you're going to take their best defensive player off the roster. That could be painful. He's open to be traded. I don't think he'll get traded. I think they'll work it out. But yeah, I mean, they just went and signed J.J. Watt in order to try and take some pressure off of Jones and have someone else take some double teams and allow him to be even more dominant. And now that's kind of in jeopardy, and we'll have to see where that one goes.
So let's get to the Seahawks. A few things of note, and we'll get into kind of a little Jamal Adams conversation. Seahawks worked out quarterback, Oregon State alum, Sean Mannion, this past weekend. Vikings back up in 2019 and 20. He's just a placeholder guy. I would imagine it's a hedge thing against maybe a Smith injury, something like that. Nobody's going to supplant Smith as a backup quarterback.
Yeah, Gino's
at this point. Right. So it's just a guy to kind of take some snaps in camp, but he's not signed or anything. They just brought him in. I just thought it was interesting that they continue to kind of look at all positions.
Well, I mean, you look at that, and you've got a couple of guys, Magoo and Danny Etling, who are, below Geno Smith, and they like to have an extra arm or two just so that way the veterans aren't having to make all the throws all day in camp, and just, give them a little bit of a break and that kind of stuff. They have those guys, but I think from what we've seen, Etling's not an NFL like quarterback. He's a guy that is a camp body. And so if you can upgrade from a camp body to a potential backup, I think you do that. Mannion could be that. I think Mannion was one of those guys that coming out of college, you looked at him and you go, there could be something there.
Totally. He had a great senior campaign in college, and he ended up going in the third round to the Rams in 2015, but he's only started 2 games in the NFL since then, and those were injury starts.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So he's a guy that, coming out of the draft, there were, you could see there was something there. There was talent. There was a pretty high ceiling, but there was also a fairly low floor. And one of the things that we've now gotten in 5 years of Mannion in the NFL is that he's a career backup at best. He's not a guy that's going to come in and wow anyone and win a starting job anywhere. So he's just looking for a job.
Yeah.
And if Geno Smith were to get hurt in camp and they needed someone, are you going to run with Magoo as your backup in a year that you're hoping to make the Super Bowl, or do you want someone with a little bit more experience?
A guy that can get you through 2 or 3 games.
Yeah, a guy that can manage, can be a game manager for a game or two, and get you through a game and hopefully give your team a chance to win. Not that they're going to go out and win it.
So let me ask you this: do you think that Jared Goff is a glorified game manager type quarterback?
Take the word glorified off.
Well, I think that he's viewed by some as more than just a game manager.
Why?
I don't know. But don't you get that sense that he's viewed that way in some circles?
In some circles, I think he is viewed that way. I mean, that's why the Lions went and got him. It wasn't just that they were, trading Stafford. They wanted Goff because he had a year a couple of years ago where he put up some good stats, and there is some, when he coming out of college, he was viewed as a guy with a ton of potential and a potential star, and it just never has developed, and he can't throw the ball downfield.
Right. So the reason for my question, though, is kind of going back to the Seahawks. Can we win with a game manager type quarterback in Shane Waldron's offense? And I was just thinking, yeah, we probably could. I mean, the rest of the roster is pretty decent. And if you take the long ball game out of it, we're just essentially the Rams offense with a game manager. So, we could probably still win some games, I would think.
No, that's a good point. If the Seahawks offense isn't going to be exactly what the Rams offense was, but there's going to be a ton of similarities. And if you can win with Jared Goff with the Rams, then you can win with Geno Smith. And the Seahawks. Now, you're not winning a Super Bowl that way, but you can win games, and
you could get to 500.
Yeah,
plus.
and if Wilson misses a couple of games, and you can, go 1-1 or something during his absence, and just kind of hold serve and
exactly
get yourself to where you get your star quarterback back. Fine, that's great. Go for it. And that's why the team keeps bringing Geno Smith back. Is because he is that guy. He's the game manager who can, hold the ship down, and while we wait for Wilson to get healthy.
So a personnel move too, actually. Seahawks waived Savion Smith, cornerback, to make room for a signature of a wide receiver, Darius Robertson from Wayne State. Was in Cardinals minicamp this offseason, but they released him about a month after he made his first appearance with them. He's a real small guy, but he's speedy, 5'9", 170 pounds. He also does kick returns and punt returns. So there's a specific reason why a guy like that comes into camp. I mean, they're looking for a guy like Estridge, basically. Not that Estridge is out. We'll talk about that in a second, of minicamp first days here. But a guy like this comes in to fill that role in camp, because the Seahawks still want to be able to run those plays and have a guy, take on some of those routes to pretend that he's Estridge, essentially. I mean, he doesn't really have a chance, I don't think, to make a roster, but no. He's a camp body.
But yeah, he's a camp body who's in the Estridge mold, so they can practice the plays that they're installing specifically for Estridge while Estridge is sidelined.
Yeah, so let's talk about injuries a little bit. Okay. So we have a couple of players, a handful, that did not make appearances in the first practice, and a couple of those are maybe longer than others. Well,
there were 3 players that they dealt with as far as putting on official lists. So you've got Dwayne Estridge and Travis Homer, who were put on the physically unable to perform list. They're both.
So what's Homer got?
I did.
Well, Estridge has a toe. So Pete Carroll came out and said he's got a toe he's been dealing with since after the draft, like in mini camp. So it's been hanging around since the end of May and through June, and they're just bringing him along slow because he hasn't had a chance to really work out and be in top shape. So they're going to bring him along. And he said it would probably be a week to 2 weeks before he would be fully 100%.
Yeah, with Homer, it's a calf injury that's been lingering. So those two guys are on the physically unable to perform list. What that means is that they're eligible for the physically unable to perform list. If for some reason they are still not healthy when the rosters are set, before week 1, they can be placed on the PUP list instead of injured reserve. They can also be taken off that list at any time right now. It's not like the in-season PUP list where you have to miss 6 games. At this point, they can be taken off tomorrow and activated. So it's not a thing. Yeah. And then the rookie guard center, Pierre Olivier Lestage.
There you go. You've worked on that, Keith.
I have actually. I was making sure that I had it before we opened. And so he was placed on the non-football injury list. He actually had a sports hernia when he came to Seattle. He practiced with it during the June camps and whatnot, really fought through it and was able to make an impact and make an impression on the coaches despite fighting through the injury and the pain, and which is actually kind of good. And then they were like, let's just get it fixed now. And so he may be
he's shut down for the season. I mean, even if he's ready in September, October, he won't have any practice. He's a rookie. He's probably going to be on that.
Well, they can get it. They can actually, so that was in June. He's not going to be. It's 6 weeks from when they have it. So we're talking mid-August probably before they can get him on the field. He may get a couple of practices or a couple of weeks of practice before rosters are set, but he's probably not making it onto the roster. But he'll make it onto the practice squad, right, and be able to be called up when he's ready. And so he'll get his practice time, but it's not like he would just be done. And that's what they meant. They wanted to get it done in June, because if they'd waited and it didn't get better and he was going to need it, and then they were shutting him down, now or closer to week 1, then his rookie year's gone. And so doing it this way, he'll be back before training camp's over.
2 injuries of note beyond that. Ethan Posick has a little hammy, which allowed Kyle Fuller, the backup center, to have all the starter reps on the first day. Bad for Posick, good for Fuller, although it's not a serious thing. It's just one of those things they held him out for. And then Jamal Adams in the offseason, just as a reminder, we all saw how hard Jamal Adams plays football, and we saw him basically playing with half an arm in one game towards the end there, and some thumbs, and his fingers were completely broken. And so he had off-season surgery on, I think, his both thumbs and both shoulders, which is crazy. I mean, just that alone, that rehab is probably 8 weeks to 10 weeks. And before you can really start to kind of work out again. And so they held him out. Pete Carroll said it wasn't because of the contract. It was just because they were kind of going to bring him along slow anyway. So that leads me to kind of the first question. I mean, we've got a lot of topics to talk about. We might as well talk about Jamal Adams right up front, just a contract kind of a discussion. Chris Clough on Twitter talked about the Jamal Adams contract, and things sound optimistic, but he was just kind of wondering. And so I tweeted back to him. I thought that Jamal Adams would sign in the second day of camp, and I gave him a number of like $68 million over 4 years with $40 million guaranteed. So that was like a 17 APY. I thought that would get it done for both sides. It had mixed reaction. That had mixed reactions. Some folks agree kind of that's where it's going to be. Others are, that's a little high, maybe too much guaranteed money. What do you think, Keith?
I think that's about right. 4 years, money in that range. He's young. People got to remember he's young. Yes, he came over from the Jets. He was a veteran. He was already an All-Pro. So people just assume, he's probably 28, 29. No, he's 26. he's young. 4 years for him is
to make him the top safety.
Yeah.
Paid safety in the NFL.
So you find a way to you end up making him the top safety in the NFL, and then you do so in a way that isn't like crushing the team as far as cap ramifications and all of that. And you kind of push some of the money out into the future where the cap's going to explode again. And so I just think that it works. One of the things, Pete Carroll came out and said that he was that they were close. That everything's in a good place is what he said, and that it's going to get done. We're going to take care of it here soon, very soon.
Yeah, which tells me that it's within $1 million.
Yeah,
like they're really close. They're just hammering some details out on small little guaranteed things having to do with Pro Bowls and workout bonuses, and when the roster officially starts at the end of the year and before the NFL season, how many days it takes for every guarantee to be put in place. I mean, those sorts of details just take a little bit of time.
Yeah, so that's perfect. I mean, I think that they've agreed to the majority of the stuff enough that Adams's agent is like, yeah, go ahead and don't hold out, go in and practice and get yourself in there with the team, because this will be done here in the next day or two. And it's little stuff like that. If they were still, a couple $1 million off per year, or $10 million off on what the guarantee money.
Jamal Adams hold out, and
he wouldn't be
publicly saying, I might as well get traded, because he would be putting maximum pressure on the team. He's not. He would
be doing what Chandler Jones is doing.
Exactly.
But instead he's there. He's not practicing, but you got to remember he had finger and shoulder surgery, multiple.
What do you think about the contract situation with Seattle possibly doing as much as $40 million? That's just a guess for me, but it's going to be between 30 and 40 million, I would assume. And the way that he plays a brutal brand of football, and he's not a huge guy, but he plays like it. So do you think that has an impact on the way the Seahawks view him as far as his ability to stay on the field?
One, he's young, and two, he showed last year he'll play through it and deal with the stuff in the offseason. He's not a guy that's going to miss a lot of time. And so I don't think they care. If he was 30 and was missing, time and dealing with all these injuries every year, and that, I think they would care. But at 26, no.
All right. So let's talk about some of the things that you want to talk about, Keith. What are you seeing in camp as some storylines that you're kind of paying attention to, and that might have a great impact on how this kind of unfolds in the next 3 to 4 weeks?
Well, one of the things that I'm really watching is the situation at defensive end / outside linebacker, because there's a lot of overlap there. And we were kind of wondering what was going to happen with Alden Smith, and would he even make it to training camp? Well, you know what? He reported he's out there practicing. And yeah, I mean, he has to factor into the equation, which we never committed to factoring him into the equation, because we always kind of assumed that there was a chance that all of his legal off-field stuff would become bad enough the team would just let him go. I
don't think that equation has actually changed. I mean, what I understand happened, Keith, is that in the off season, in mini camps and so forth, that the team felt like he was out of shape and didn't want to bring him in and throw him into the mix in that sort of a situation. Plus the legal stuff may have been a factor, but the same legal stuff that was legal stuff then is still a factor right now. But he went back and he worked out and he came into camp completely in shape. So he's on the field, but he still has that arraignment scheduled for August 24th that is going to really dictate, it could possibly dictate if he plays this year or not, if the team elects to keep him, depending on the information that might come out publicly about the situation. So it's something to monitor. But man, am I excited about having a guy like that on the team, because here's a guy that has a real opportunity to be a rotational guy at the SAM or on the edge that can really impact a game at any given moment. We saw what Dallas did against Seattle when Russell Wilson played, and he was a big, huge part of that disruption.
I think that a lot of people will look at Smith, and when he was in San Francisco, he was a dominant player. And then all of his off-field stuff happened, and he was out of the league. He came back to Dallas last year, and then when Dallas let him go at the end of the season, and he was on a 1-year deal, and they were like, "Yeah, we're not gonna bring him back." Everyone goes, "Well, he must not have much in the tank." And then they look, he only had 4.5 sacks, and this is a guy that almost hit 20, when he was in San Francisco, and so it was like, maybe he just doesn't have anything left. But what I think is missing is that he wasn't just playing the outside linebacker in the 3-4 and attacking quarterbacks. They had him as an outside linebacker, basically a Sam. They had him in the Bruce Irvin role here in Seattle, which is now going to be the Darrell Taylor role, where he was setting the edge against the run. He was dropping into coverage. He had was out in the flat in zone. They had him doing lots of things. And a lot
Do you
of
expect him to take kind of an undersized 5-tech role then, like behind Kerry Hyder?
No, I expect him to take to be a guy that fits in at Sam linebacker / defensive end in the Bruce Irvin role.
Okay.
And so he would be a backup to Darrell Taylor, a guy that could get some pass rush snaps here and there. Not a 5-tech. He would be 7 or 9-tech. He's bigger than he was in his San Francisco days. So
it'll be interesting to me. So you bring up kind of a good point in that role, in that those guys both have very similar skill sets. We haven't seen it yet with Darrell Taylor on the field, but all reports indicate, and the film from college indicate, that's the kind of player he is. So when you take a look at like a Marquis Blair, we'll get through a lot of players here, and I'm kind of mixing it up a little bit, but if you put Marquis Blair side by side with Darrell Taylor, who do you want on the field in a nickel situation? Darrell Taylor's going to come up and rush. Alden Smith might come up and rush, but there's so many options now on the roster. Who gets the playing time? Like, I heard that Marquis Blair is taking the starting strong safety role, while Adams is on the sidelines. That's awesome, but he's also the starting nickel. It was reported. So where are all these guys going to fit?
Well, I think with Blair, it's a different equation, because he's the 5th defensive back. And so, he's the starting strong safety when Adams is out. When Adams is back, he'll become the starting nickel, right? And then he's also the starting nickel. So instead of, when they go to the nickel, he moves from strong safety into his nickel spot, and they're bringing Ryan Neal in as the strong safety in those situations. So they're moving Blair around, but that's the nickel stuff. That doesn't really affect Smith and Taylor, because in the nickel, you lose that linebacker spot, which they play, but they move up and become defensive ends. And so really what it comes down to, as far as trying to figure out the playing time, is all the defensive ends, which is where I started with all of this when I brought up Smith, was because they have so many pass rushers, like edge pass rushers, who plays, right? And you're going to have a rotation where it's going to be, 65-35, ideally, between 2 players at every spot. But, you've got, for 3 pass rushing spots, you've got like 9 guys. So there's so many bodies. Somebody is going to
that
be
camp battle is just amazing to me.
It's going to be fun to watch, but it's also going to be some of these players, some of these talented players aren't going to make the roster. They're going to get cut. They're going to get picked up by another team. It's almost like cornerback was for Seattle for the 2013 season, where you had guys get cut, get picked up by other teams and become their starter. And, defensive end is almost at that level this year for the Seahawks.
And it's something that the national media really hasn't even put together for Seattle yet.
They're so used to Seattle's having pass rush problems. And then especially last year where at the first part of the year, they had nothing going as far as a pass rush. That's sort of everyone's take on the Seahawks front.
What's your take? What's your take on what the rotation might look like?
Well, if you look at the last year with the last 8 games when I think they led the NFL in sacks in that time, and they were like the number 3 defense overall over that stretch. I think that's kind of what you look at, and then you realize they added Hyder to the mix on top of that, and maybe Alden Smith. I mean, it is a deep and talented group. Obviously, Dunlap's the starter on one side.
And Taylor, I mean, Taylor's added to that mix. He didn't play a single down last year.
Yeah, but he's going to start at linebacker and then move up.
Right, but he's still going to be available almost at any time based on scheme and matchups and so forth. So.
Yeah, so he's going to be able to pass rush whenever they want him to. But yeah, Dunlap's going to start on one side, and then who's going to start on the other? Probably Hyder is going to start on the other side. He took
first team snaps yesterday.
And then that'll be the base, and then Hyder / Collier can move inside. Collier might start at the 3 tech, and just
got Monet in there right now.
Yep, I know. I'm just saying Collier might end up starting at the 3 tech, or at least in passing situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so the conversion of him to a defensive tackle maybe nearing completion, but
and then you've got Kim Dichie in that same role.
Yeah, you've got him in there. You've got and then who comes in? So you've got guys like Robinson, who's going to probably be Dunlap's backup and get snaps over there. And then on the other side, Darrell Taylor's going to need snaps.
Yeah.
And, Collier is going to want to play there, but I think he's going to end up at the 3 tech. Rasheem Green wants to factor in there, but he looks like a guy who might be on the outside looking in. But he's also, when healthy, he's flashed some incredible talent. He just has a hard time being healthy enough to ever make an impact. So,
and you've got Benson Mayowa. You've got Al Woods that can come in there for Puna Ford. In a rotation role. I mean, there's a lot of guys.
And Monet can move over and into the nose tackle.
And then you've got 4 interior guys that play up close to the line of scrimmage that can be a factor as well. Jamal Adams as a pass rusher. You've got Jordan Brooks with elite sideline to sideline speed. You've got Bobby Wagner, who's always been good at selectively coming in on a blitz, and then Marquis Blair as a kind of a wild card in this whole thing. I think the team really envisions him being a second Jamal Adams on this team, a guy that can play anything, really, just be all over the field and kind of a weapon.
When they drafted him, it felt like that was kind of what they wanted, what they were trying to do. And then last year, I mean, that was really what they wanted from him as the nickel. And they were they had the Diggs as the single high safety, and then essentially you have 2 rogue strong safeties up near the line of scrimmage with Adams and Blair, and letting them do whatever that particular play call asked them to do. But it could be anything. And but then with Blair's injury, we never really got to see it. And I think this year we finally get to see it, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's really exciting. I mean, if you put all those players together that we just talked about, like 12 players of that nucleus, you could really make an argument, Keith, that that's one of the best front 7 combinations in the NFL. And you add the safeties in to that mix, and it's crazy amount of talent and scheme diversity in that group. It's like, man, Ken Norton I wouldn't even be able to sleep at night if I was Ken Norton, because I would be thinking about all the combinations that I could have at my calling to really just make the defense really fun and dynamic, and probably as good or better than any defense the Seahawks have had in the last 10 years. And we've had some great ones. We had 3 years in a row where we were the top defense in the NFL. I'm not saying that we're going to have the secondary that kind of completes that whole thing, but I'm just talking about the front, like the front 7, essentially, that are just amazing.
I mean, as good as the front 7 and the safeties are on this roster, I wonder how much we're going to get to see them really be fun, or if Norton's going to want to try and protect the cornerbacks.
So you think he'd run in base more this year just because of that?
No, maybe not that, but just not blitz as much. And so that way you have both Wagner and Brooks dropping back into coverage in order to fill out, the zones and just protect the cornerbacks a little bit because of, well, let's just face it.
So you think that they would
position.
Drop 7 into coverage on a regular basis?
Yeah.
What would that look like to you?
What would that look like? It would look like so
you'd run a base front.
No, you wouldn't run a base front. You'd run kind of a like a nickel package where you'd have, your more of a NASCAR-y kind of front, 2 linebackers, 5 defensive backs, and then you drop into a cover 3 situation where you've got Diggs in the back middle, you've got the cornerbacks in the back outside thirds, and then your 2 linebackers and 2 strong safeties kind of forming an envelope underneath that, asking them to throw the ball, 3 yards.
That's a lot of athleticism.
Yeah. You're creating a situation where you're like, feel free, throw it for that 3-yard gain, and then we're going to come up and make a tackle. And you're just going to you're going to have to be patient enough to do that over and over and over and over again if you want to score, because you're not beating us deep, and
you're not going to beat us underneath.
You're not really going to beat us underneath completely, because you're going to have to take that short gain, and then those guys aren't missing tackles. All of them are tackling machines.
So that tells me that you would be really confident in this defense in a sense, because what you're saying is, and I would imagine, knowing you, that what you're saying is at the beginning of the year, we would kind of do that more and let the corners develop behind this defense. And then the defense really can be dynamic because you can do everything really well.
Yeah. And so that is kind of what I'm saying is you can protect your corners that way, dropping 7 into coverage and letting them just be that outside, at the outside back third of that zone, where you're not really asking them to match someone step for step as, in man coverage, and instead, work it that way. And so you just kind of take away the big play and you ask teams to throw it underneath, and then let your safeties and linebackers do a bunch of tackling. And so all of that works. And you've also got pass rushers. So sure, they're taking these, 3 to 5, 6 yard dink and dunks, trying to get down the field, but 1 sack and it's over, right? And that's the end of a drive. And you've got pass rushers that can get there. So there are times in the Pete Carroll era where Seattle's defense has been frustrating because they keep giving up 3rd down conversions and they allow teams to, kind of methodically move it down the field. But then at the end of the game, they've given up, 16 points because all those drives ended in field goals but 1, and a lot of drives ended just outside of field goal range, because that's what's happening, right? You're forcing them to string together a 10, 12 play drive if they're going to score. And at some point, they're either going to make a mistake or the front line, the pass rushers are going to get a sack and that kills a drive, or there's going to be a penalty and that will kill a drive. And that's sort of what Pete Carroll has done, and that's what he's preached. And last year was a little different in that they attacked so much and forced a lot of plays that way, but they also gave up a lot of big plays, and that killed Pete Carroll. He hated that.
So how do you create a balance, Keith, where you're not conservative, you're not overly aggressive, but you still create a lot of turnover opportunities? We've got some turnover opportunity players on the roster. Let's talk about that for half a second, then we'll switch to the offense. Like, what do you envision this team to look like as far as a turnover machine?
Well, I think it's going to depend on whether they can get pressure with the front four regularly or whether they have to blitz. And some of that will depend on the inside of interior pass rush, because the edges, the pass rush is going to be great. But if there's nothing coming in the middle, the quarterback will simply step forward, and the outside guys will just run right by. And so if they can get some interior push, they're going to create a lot of turnovers, because you're going to have 7 guys back and a quarterback, throwing off his spot into tight coverage or just, out of rhythm. And they're going to generate a ton of turnovers that way. If they can't regularly get that pass rush because they're not getting the interior push, they're going to have to blitz more. They're going to have to do other things in order to create those opportunities, because that's one of the things about, playing in the zone is that eventually some guy will come open. And if the quarterback can step up and avoid the outside pass rush, that's going to buy them an extra couple seconds to find the soft spot in the zone. And so it really, that interior pass rush becomes the thing that makes or breaks this defense from a turnover point.
I totally agree. I think that you absolutely completely nailed it as far as the key to this whole thing, because Pete doesn't like to give up those third down conversions. You're absolutely right. But he also likes to get the ball. He likes to take the ball. He always has talked about playing a 4-man front to generate enough pressure for this exact reason, because it allows the team their back end to work at optimum efficiency. I think the key thing, and I keep going back to this, but the key player in all of this, if it could work, would be like Robert Nkemdiche, because he's just got a huge opportunity here on this defense, I think, to not only make the roster, but have an impact. If he could somehow make the roster and make the impact, this whole defense could just really work really well.
From a talent perspective, he has the ability to get pressure on the inside, to push the pocket, and not just, prevent the quarterback from stepping up and letting the defensive ends get to him, but just to get to the quarterback on his own. He's got the talent to do that. For him, it's always been a matter of work ethic and practice habits and discipline and those kind of things. And after being out of the league and now fighting to get his way back into the league, he's saying all the right things about recognizing, the chance that he's been given and not willing to waste the opportunity and all these kind of things. And if his head really is screwed on straight, he could go back to being what we thought he was going to be as he came out of college. And that's a truly special player. And if you had a truly special player in the center of that line, that pass rush, this defense becomes scary.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because it's either Nkemdiche or it's Collier. And you've got Collier with a skill set that's good. I mean, it's solid, but he's a bull rusher guy. He doesn't have a lot of moves, a lot of weapons at his disposal. He's got strong hands.
Really good. He's really strong, but he's not a dynamic athlete.
Exactly.
So
interesting. All right. Anything else on the defense?
I was just going to say, as we go through this, and we talk about this defense being dominant, we've kind of glossed over that the weakest part of the defense, and the reason why the national media says this defense isn't going to be good is the cornerbacks. But as we've pointed out here over the last 14 minutes, is that cornerback isn't the most important piece of the scheme, when you're playing this cover 3 and you're asking them to just essentially be safeties in the back end and play zone, it's not as big of a deal.
Is that going to be frustrating for fans to watch?
I
You're
don't
talking
know.
about giving up a lot of stuff underneath when you say that. Now they have to be able to change that up. They can't just play cover 3 all the time.
You're right, they can't, but that's going to be their base. That's going to be what they do most of the time, and that's what they've done the entirety of Pete Carroll's tenure.
Is DJ Reid and Akella Witherspoon capable of holding down the outside edges on their own?
Akella Witherspoon, yes. DJ Reid is
to be determined.
Corner. He's a guy who will excel in man coverage. That's who he is. He's better than the rest of the cornerbacks at that. But he lacks the length to do what they want the corners to do. The reason why the corners were Richard Sherman and Brandon Browner and all these really tall guys is was very beneficial in a cover 3.
Mm-hmm.
You know, DJ Reid is what, 5'3". Okay, not really. I'm just,
yeah, he's the second Hobbit on the team. Russell Wilson's the first one.
Yep. Wait.
Just kidding. I didn't mean to offend all Hobbits.
Actually, both of them are phenomenal athletes, especially Reid. I mean, we can go to that. He doesn't have that traditional Seahawk length. And so that we don't know how that's going to work. Well, they may not go to the pure cover 3 the way I kind of expect them to, entirely because they've got to corner him and another guy in rookie Trey Brown who have man cover skills. And actually, Trey Flowers, for all of the much maligned guy that he is, his man cover stats are really good, and its zone cover stats are kind of bad. And so they might look at that and go, okay, well, maybe we're going to do something different. I don't expect them to, just because it's Pete Carroll and Ken Norton, and I know what they want, and they want to run that cover 3. That's Pete Carroll's, bread and butter. But they might find themselves with the personnel to do something different.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, behind Reid and Witherspoon, the competition will be fierce in this offseason. We know that Amadi and Blair are going to kind of be that nickel role, but you've got to have a couple other backups to sit behind Reid and Witherspoon that are going to take some snaps. You've got Trey Brown, Flowers, and Demarius Randall, and Pierre De Sierra, all kind of competing for 5 total spots. How do you see that kind of playing out?
I don't have any clue how that's going to play out. And that's why this is so much fun, because the team really likes Randall. And he's got a bunch of starts at cornerback, and so he's a guy that seems to factor in. I don't think that we've seen the best of Trey Flowers. I know Pete Carroll continues to talk about him and love him.
Yeah.
And so I there's that. Pierre De Sierra was the best cornerback this team has ever cut. And the thing is, he made the roster, and then a trade for Jeremy Lane fell apart. And so he ended up, because of the guaranteed money, they ended up letting De Sierra go, and he was the best defensive back in for the Colts for a year. And it's one of those things. He's had a couple of bad years since then, and I mean, he's a tremendous in locker room guy, but we'll see.
And he's back in a defense and a scheme that he plays well in.
Yes. And like I said, we'll see what he's got left in the tank. The last couple of years might have shown that he's, approaching the end of a career. But if he comes back and plays like he did a couple of years ago, it's funny, during that preseason, I kept seeing fans and beat reporters talk about Richard Sherman and what he's doing on the outside, not noticing that Sherman was on the sideline and that De Sierra had taken Sherman's spot in those preseason games. And it was, I don't know, kind of entertaining. So he's a guy with a lot of ability, and we'll see. He also is older and has been around the league now and had a couple of bad years the last couple of years. He very much could be a non-factor. So
what do you
have no
think
idea.
about like a Deshaun Shedd coming back in to help the Seahawks in a coaching capacity?
Oh God, I'd love that.
Isn't he back there? I thought he has come back and joined the team as a coach.
If he has, I hadn't seen that, and I wish that I had. That's a phenomenal. So Deshaun Shedd is the guy that
I gotta go look that up, Keith, because
he spent 2.5 years on the practice squad. He was a safety, then he was a cornerback, then he was a safety, then he made the roster to play special teams. And they moved him over to corner, and then they moved him back to safety. And he goes, no, I really want to stay at corner, even though traditionally he'd been a safety. But I think he saw
they brought him back. He's the coach for the Seahawks, defensive back coach, assistant defensive back coach.
He saw that he could make an impact at corner, even though it was a very deep corner room. And he fought like crazy to get a spot on the roster, played special teams like crazy, and eventually worked his way up to being a starter. And it's just an incredible, you don't see guys that start out for 2.5 years on a practice squad, end up starting caliber corners. And
I've heard it from a couple of people that Pete Carroll believes that Deshaun Shedd is going to be a defensive coordinator someday in the NFL and possibly a head coach, because he's got that kind of mental ability.
So the thing when you have guys like Shedd who fought and everything in order for every opportunity and had to practice squad it for 2.5 years and learn, is it didn't necessarily come as naturally to them. So they had to learn all the tiny little intricate parts of everything. And if he can teach, then he can be great, because what we're describing in all of this is Chris Richard, who, granted, he was a higher pick, came in, got some opportunities, and just kind of bombed out of the NFL, ended up back with Pete Carroll, where he went to college, as an assistant there, and then worked his way up to being a defensive coordinator and a head coaching candidate. But really what made Chris Richard great was his ability to teach all the little details. And his ability to turn Brandon Browner into an actual corner and, to get guys like Byron Maxwell, who was a college special teamer and never really even played on defense, and turning him into a starting caliber corner at the NFL. I mean, this is what Chris Richard did and is known for. And if Shedd can teach, he is in a position to be the next Chris Richard and become that guy. And honestly, that's what this team has been missing since Richard left.
Yeah. I saw this news and we just failed to talk about it, but I think I picked up on it like 6 weeks ago. And I think it is huge. It's like one of those things that takes time a little bit to develop. But Pete trusts him back there, and he's not the head guy, but I think it's only a matter of time, it sounds like. So switching gears, let's go to the offense. Keith, your biggest storyline that you're following on the offensive side of the ball?
It's got to be, how does the wide receiver rotation work? Because you know who the top two guys are, but you've got Estridge and Swain and a whole litany of other guys, including Penny Hart, who is continuing to just get more and more people excited, all battling for snaps and roster spots and who's going to be the number 3 and who's, we have guys that could be the number 3 or they could be off the roster completely. It's not the deepest group in terms of experience.
It doesn't seem like it,
but there's some talent there. It's just who out of that talent becomes the NFL caliber player, not just potential, but actually, production.
So I I was out watching a little bit of film, Cody Parkinson from a couple of years ago. I just managed to, I don't know why it came up on my YouTube feed, but it did. So I clicked on it, and it was Stanford highlights, during his senior campaign. And a player that I noticed besides Colby Parkinson on there was Conor Weddington. At the time, Conor Weddington was kind of their speed guy, the slot guy. And he ended up, like in this film that I was watching, he ended up taking, 4 or 5 dump off passes and then running in space to pick up additional yards. And I was like, that's the guy that we picked up. And so I kind of made note of that. I just, so in that role, that same role that we talked about earlier today, where we picked up that one player that was 170 pounds, at least Conor Weddington's like 6 foot, 190. So with a lot of speed. You mentioned Tyler Lockett and Metcalf, and then Estridge. I think that's definitely your top 3. But behind that, you're right, Swain and Penny Hart. To me, that's the top 5. That's the guys that are locked almost. We heard last week from Corbin Smith from Seahawk Maven, Sports Illustrated, that Penny Hart was really the guy that was popping for him in the mini camps earlier. And he was a guy that he was excited to see in regular camp that we're going through right now. And so I've got my eyes on him as well, as kind of being a guy that maybe can even take it at the next step. He didn't get a ton of playing time last year, but he was on the roster for at least half the season. So
he seems to have a great rapport with Russell Wilson, where he just Wilson just knows when, so he can throw the ball right as Hart's coming out of his break, because he knows he's going to get that separation and catch the football. So that kind of stuff, he doesn't have to wait that extra, 10th of a second to see it before he throws it. And
what's interesting to me is that there's only one DK Metcalf on this roster. And and the majority of other guys that are kind of accumulated are more like
Tyler
Lockett or Estridge. Yeah. And so let's talk about Shane Waldron a little bit, because for me, that was the biggest storyline on the offensive side of the ball is Shane Waldron. Like, what kind of impact is this new offense going to have? We already kind of talked about how he's going to create space for wide receivers and scheme things open and so forth that we've kind of been challenged with in the past. But it really is a dynamic shift, I think, in the offense as far as timing, tempo, running sets out of the same look. Talk to us about that and maybe the impact that he would have across the roster, from Russell Wilson to Chris Carson, Penny, and to the wide receivers and tight ends.
Well, okay, so that question we could do an entire show on. But what you look at with that is there's a couple things. One, that with in the past, both with Tom Cable when he was managing the running game, and when it was Schottenheimer, it was very much a straight ahead, we're going to outmuscle you. I mean, it's inside zone. So yeah, there's some of that, but it's very much, it became, we have to be bigger and stronger than you to win. And oftentimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. With Waldron's offense in the running game side, because they brought over an assistant running back coach who's now the running game coordinator. But that from that approach, it's now going to be more about, spreading guys out and getting to the edge and outside zone. So it'll be like, the stretch play, and then they cut back.
So what you're doing is you're taking a defensive lineman and you're pushing him in a direction that he wants to kind of go in, and you just keep pushing. Yeah.
And so if a guy, if the plays go into the right and the guy attacks your left shoulder, you just let him, you don't let him go, but you just right it. If he attacks your right shoulder, then you push him wide and you just get him to go down the sideline in that way. And by doing either one of those two things, you create cutback lanes for the running back. And that becomes, it's just a different thing. And so rather than forcing your guys to win one-on-one battles, in order for everything to work. Now you're setting up a situation where we're going to scheme victories for them, even if they wouldn't necessarily win that one-on-one battle. And you're going to tire defensive lines out because now they're going sideways instead of up the field. And it's just more movement. It's more work. And so getting an opportunity where you can maybe get a guy like Aaron Donald in the division to just have to work harder to make his impact, and you tire him out a little bit, and then you can get more success later in games, or force teams to rotate him off the field more earlier in games, and that kind of stuff. It's just there's scheming successes rather than just trying to line up and punch the other one in the mouth. That's the cliche, right? There's more than that to the offense now.
I love the fact that you paused the question, listing out all the other dynamic players, and you focused on the offensive line, because I really do think that that's totally an underrated thing to talk about.
Well, it's really recognize who you're talking to, right? I've come to the realization that I like offensive line play. I study it. I like watching their footwork and their hands and all of that. And I'm the only person who does, and that all of our listeners are like, please talk about something else. But that's kind of my thing. And so when you look at that impact, to me, it shows how their ability to win more regularly on every play will make Russell Wilson's job easier, and he's going to be awesome.
That's so key.
It's going to get guys like DK Metcalf 40 yards downfield with regularity, where Wilson's not running for his life by the time he gets downfield.
Or the defensive back is climbing on Metcalf's shoulders. He's got separation because he's been kind of helped with the scheme.
Yeah, and all of that. So there's just so much to where there's just all these things work together. But the offensive line play is going to make the other players who are already awesome, it's just going to make them better.
Tell me how that works. Like what makes you confident that this scheme specifically does that? So when Cable was here and we went through the Bevel years and so forth, it's a similar kind of blocking scheme in a broad sense. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but in a broad sense, it kind of is. We got kind of all excited. Now, it could have just been the Cable thing, right? But we got kind of excited when we switched blocking schemes. We kind of went with that bigger guy mentality, the bull, pushing guys out of the way, power run scheme. So now we're going back to a more, I'm not going to say it's finesse necessarily, but talk to me about the difference between finesse and scheme and power, and how it makes Russell Wilson's job or the offense look different or feel different. Well,
the principles that they're based on in order to create running lanes are different. In Tom Cable's scheme, where they went with Justin Britt's probably the best example, where they had a 335-pound center. And that's just huge by NFL standards, but you know what? The guy could run people over. And you don't find centers that could do that. So, he was the great example for them. J.R. Sweezy may be another one, who these guys are super strong. They can push people backwards. And they create running lanes that way. Those guys also tend to be bigger, a little slower of foot. They struggle in pass blocking because they don't move side to side as well. They have a hard time staying in front of, quicker pass rushers. And so it's a trade-off. What you end up with in this scheme, I don't want to say it's finesse, because it really isn't. It's just different and based on different principles, where you get guys moving sideways rather than up the field. And you don't have to push them back. You can just push them sideways out of the way.
Or hold your own.
Yeah. And so it becomes, you're using different principles. And I don't like the saying that it's finesse, because
I don't either. We're still talking about 300-pound plus guys that are animals, right?
It's just based on different principles. Now, you end up with guys. You need guys that are a little more agile to run this scheme, which tends to mean that they also end up being better pass blockers typically because they're more agile. They have the ability to mirror what the defender's doing and stay in front of them and that kind of stuff a little bit better. At the same time, you end up in a situation where you can't it's sometimes it can be less dominant. Like it's got a much higher floor but lower ceiling type of running scheme. So, there's a trade-off, but I just think that given Wilson and given, what this team wants to do, it's just a better fit for his talents, for the talents of the linemen, for all of that. I mean, the situation in terms of all of this is the other thing that it does, since everything seems to be going, it's a stretch play, right? There's a lot of outside zone where things are going laterally first until the running back puts their foot in the ground and cuts up field. That lateral movement can create lateral movement in the linebackers that opens things up for the wide receiver.
Play action pass.
A lot of play action. And so you can manipulate the defense in different ways this way. And it allows you to, especially, you get everything going to the left and it's a play action. Wilson comes back to the right. Well, then guess what? The linebackers all shifted over because they stay.
And that essentially buys Russell Wilson 2 seconds.
Yeah. And it also opens up, if they move laterally, to their right, which would be the offense's left, it opens up a space for a tight end or a running back or a receiver to catch an easy pass because the linebackers have moved. So it's kind of opened up a zone and get the ball in space and turn up field. And that's one of the things the Seahawks just didn't do under Schottenheimer is they didn't create situations where the receivers got the ball in their hands with the ability to do something after. And the Seahawks were one of the lowest
yards after catch teams.
Yards after catch in the entire NFL. And you think about you got Lockett and Metcalf, and you're not getting any yards after the catch. I mean, that's kind of crazy. Honestly, I want either of those guys with the ball in their hands and an opportunity to make safeties look stupid.
And now
because they both have the Lockett's agility and ability to just go around anyone. And do you really want to, you got DK Metcalf in space running right at you, and you're a safety who's 30 pounds lighter than him and not as fast as him. Do you really want anything to do with that? No, you don't. So I just always felt that was such a missed opportunity for the Seahawks with when Schottenheimer was here. That
I agree.
Didn't take advantage of the fact that they had guys with incredible.
And that's why he was fired. I mean, I'm convinced that's why he was fired, and philosophical differences. I think it points to exactly this because we couldn't adapt. We were a one-trick pony on offense, and this is definitely what we were missing. Camp battles.
Pete Carroll went into that meeting the day after his, defiant, no, I'm not changing coordinators. And it was like, all right, so here's what I want us to do. I want us to adapt. I want us to evolve. And instead, Schottenheimer wanted to double down on what they did, and not change and not evolve. And that was why Schottenheimer is no longer in Seattle. And instead they get Waldron, who is a very, very different person. Whereas Schotty's scheme was very old school and, dinosaur like. Waldron's, the young gun with all the new ideas and bringing over Sean McVay's stuff from the Rams. And it's just
he uses every single person in the offense, including the lineman, for specific jobs in specific alignments to create specific outcomes.
The other thing that I really like is the lack of predictability that you were going to get, because based on formation, you could tell what the Seahawks were going to do a lot under Schottenheimer. There were certain formations they only ran in. They never threw the ball. There are certain formations that they only threw the ball. They never ran. And so even though there might be play action and whatnot, teams would kind of know what was,
we would know.
Yeah, but I mean, even,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And so, but where Waldron, his offense is set up to where, from a certain personnel and formation standpoint, he has multiple running plays, multiple passing plays that he can run off that same exact formation.
And Russell Wilson in that sort of a situation where you're not just scheming to run a play, you're actually running a deception campaign. So you're taking the entire game to set up defenses, essentially for your fourth quarter. And Russell Wilson just such a master at that. So
it's just a great fit for Seattle's talent.
I agree. Pete Carroll in his press conference talked about some camp battles, and he mentioned 4 specific position groups. 3 of them are on the offense and 2 of them are on the offensive line. So I want to definitely get your take on these. We already talked about cornerback as being one of his camp battles. He wants to see how that shakes out. But he also talked about tight end, and then he talked about center and right tackle being a open competition. And I want to kind of get let's just stay with the offensive line since we were just there. What do you think about that statement coming from your head coach on the first day of camp? Oh,
I love it. Especially the right tackle, because Cedric Abuhi was terrible at the beginning of the year. His first times in the games was bad, and Shell was good. But at the end of the year, Shell was injured and not playing well, and Abuhi was great. And honestly, both of them deserve a shot to battle for a starting job. And both of them have parts of their game that says, no, you don't get to just take this. It's not just going to be given to you. You're going to have to earn it. And so I love that the right tackle spot is open for the 2 guys to fight for it. I think it's going to make for a better camp. I think it's going to make for a better result coming out of camp. And it's going to have, it's just going to be good for the team. Center is not a position where I'm as excited, because we saw what Posick was last year. He lacks the functional strength you expect of a typical offensive lineman, but he's got good feet and blah, blah, blah. And we saw, Fuller come in and just look abysmally bad when he was in there. And so it's a competition because you don't have a starter caliber player. And so I'm less excited about that one. I kind of just expected Posick to be given the job because they never replaced Fuller with a competent player. But maybe they see something in practice and they think that Fuller didn't show his ability, his talent last season, and I'm overreacting.
Different players facing different teams and different individual defensive players can look bad on any given day. So I'm willing to give a guy like Fuller a little bit more of a chance show out. What do you think about the tight end thing? So
the tight end one is fascinating. And I mentioned receiver when you asked earlier, but I honestly was like, do I mention tight end now or wait? Because you've got Disley, who for 2 years looked like an amazing, find. Like they struck gold with him for 2 years, and then but they had season-ending injuries, and then last year you could tell he was not healthy. He was still a fantastic blocker, but any kind of his ability to run, he looked more like the Disley in college who had a hard time running, and not the guy that's his first 2 years in the league where he looked great. And so he's actually going to be healthy. They brought in, Everett, who was very productive for the Rams, knows the offense. He's like kind of that guy that you bring in because he just makes everyone else learn the offense faster, because you can kind of watch what he's doing, and he can explain things in the film room and that kind of stuff. It's just a good situation. But he was incredibly productive with the Rams. And then, the wild card in there is Parkinson, who is this incredible, unique player. He's 6'7" and runs well.
I understand from Pete Carroll that he's spent the entire offseason in the weight room.
Yeah. I mean, so if he's 6'7" and runs well, if he can block at all, then he becomes a weapon, not just a player. Nobody's saying it, but the last tall wide receiver or tall tight end that could run, that Seattle had, was Jimmy Graham. And they at times built their offense around trying to get Jimmy Graham the ball. Parkinson doesn't have the history and the NFL production, but he's a tall wide receiver who can run. There's a lot of similarities in skill set, including.
And I mentioned earlier, we only have one DK Metcalf on the roster. This is a guy that's not going to have DK Metcalf speed, but he's playing from a different spot with different coverage on him that could exploit certain situations.
And if you're looking to the Rams for how that might be used, I wouldn't look at Everett and the other tight ends. I would look at Cooper Kupp, who is, the big 6'4" slot receiver with good hands, that just teams had a hard time covering him because, you put him a slot corner on him and he's got 5 inches of height difference. Well, now you're going to if you put a slot corner on, Seattle's Parkinson, you're going to give up 7 inches or 8 inches, plus the extra length and arm length and that kind of stuff. Like it's going to be a matchup nightmare. And I really think that you're going to see him out in the slot a lot, just for that reason. But if he did spend the off season in the weight room and he could bulk up enough that he can block competently, he doesn't have to be great, just be competent. Then they can use him in all sorts of different things.
Well, also really Parkinson, what is the tight end role as a blocker in Shane Waldron's blocking, like Cunningham's, line blocking scheme? What are the tight ends going to be asked to do? Are they going to be asked to seal the edges, or are they going to be asked to be an extra tackle?
They're going to be asked to, at times, a little of everything. I would say, especially when you've got Disley next to whoever the right tackle ends up being, you're going to see Disley might as well be a tackle, because they trust him to take on a defensive end one-on-one and win, and he does. And that just makes life easier. But if you put someone beside Disley so you have 2 tight ends on that side. Well, now you have a different option, because now whoever's on the outside of him, whether it be Everett or Parkinson, they can seal and you can release Disley. And you can really confuse teams. Or you can, there's just so many other things that you can do when you've got multiple talented tight ends.
All 3 guys can catch the ball and run routes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And all of them are a little bit unique. You're not going to find a better blocker than Will Disley. No, you're not going to find another 6'7" guy who can run like Colby Parkinson.
I keep going back to the red zone with that guy too.
Yep.
Wow.
Everett's crisp routes and ability to get separation despite his size
makes him just like a big wide receiver.
Yeah.
And he's not that big. For a tight end, he's like
not
6'3",
yeah.
6'4", 239 or 245 or something like that.
Yeah, his number wise, he's about DK Metcalf, although you'd never confuse the two. But he runs crisp routes. He's also a decent blocker. And so they're all 3 a little bit unique, but they're all 3 good at what they do. And the Seahawks just haven't had a tight end room like that. It's always been.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say it's always been either Jimmy Graham and a bunch of,
fodder,
or it's just been, a bunch of fodder.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
Zach Miller, who was an offensive tackle. He was a better right tackle than Seattle's right tackle. But he was never the threat to run the ball or to catch the ball.
And when we had Wilson here, he would have been a second or third tight end on any roster. And we tried to make him more than that, and it just didn't work. So behind that group that we've currently got, I noticed that last week in our live show that Corbin Smith singled out Tyler Mabry as a guy that he thought was impressive in camp.
I just don't know enough about Mabry to
know
where he fits in. And do you use a roster spot on a fourth tight end?
No, not a guy like that, because I think you have more dynamic athleticism that I think Shane Waldron would want on the field.
Yeah. And so, I mean,
who knows?
Maybe he's a hedge, and if one of the guys gets hurt, it's like, hey, at least we got this other guy who we like and know can play and be a player.
Depends on how they use Gerald Everett in alignments. Do they use Gerald Everett in a slot role or an H-back, and that gives another opportunity to have another tight end on the roster because you want more of a blocking guy available? Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and if you keep a fourth tight end because you're like, oh, we're going to be using two tight end sets all the time, and if somebody gets hurt, we want to be able to rotate and all that kind of stuff. You keep a fourth tight end, who do you lose?
Well, you're going to have 5 wide receivers instead of 6.
Or do you have
4 running backs?
4 running backs.
Yeah.
Which really means 3 running backs because
Nick
you're using up one of those for Nick Ballore, who's your special team star that isn't actually a running back.
Well, future show, we will have a roster breakdown and prediction show. The 53-man roster show at some point.
I keep looking at that. It is harder to do than any year that we've done that. It is
which is great news, really,
this year. Yeah. The Seahawks depth is significantly better this year than it was last year, and that was better than it was the year before. And
why wouldn't Russell Wilson be excited about this team, this offensive coordinator, this offensive line, and the weapons that he has to work with? Where else is he going to find that combination in any other team? I mean, there might be a handful of teams with all 3 of those.
He's not, and that's why you've seen a complete change of tune from him. Is I think he has seen the team.
Did he ever really change his tune, or did we just perceive it a different way for a while as a whole kind of media group per se? I'm not saying maybe you and I, but just in general, the perception has been that he did change his tune in the offseason. It was in a bad way, and so he got eviscerated, as well as Pete Carroll and so forth, and now he's back to quote unquote a new tune, or is it just back to just normal?
I think it's back to normal, but I think that the Athletic story, which was really well reported, does show that he was disgruntled, and it was more than just things being taken out of context.
Does that point to some level of immaturity, or did he have really legitimate reasons to be concerned about Schottenheimer? Maybe that was unreported, or Pete Carroll, or the old school offensive philosophy that Pete has that has influence on the offense.
I think it's that part, the philosophies and all of that, and he does have legitimate reasons to be concerned about that. But I think it was more, and it becomes what Green Bay is dealing with Aaron Rodgers, is when you are the franchise quarterback, you have been for years. You've got the proven track record of being one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the league. If you say that you want some input on personnel moves and those kind of things,
it's your responsibility. I mean, you are responsible for the offense.
Yeah, and so at what point do teams acquiesce to that? And at what point do they push back and say, no, I think it depends on the maturity level of the actual quarterback. You're seeing, and I don't know Rodgers, but to me, that sort of behavior that Rodgers has versus the behavior that Russell Wilson has
seems to say that Russell Wilson might be the more mature player.
Yeah, but then we also see it from Seattle's point of view. If you're not from Seattle and you don't know Russell Wilson as well as we do, I don't think it looks any different. And so but it comes down to this is this can be a whole debate. Do you ever allow your quarterback to help with personnel decisions? And if you do, what's the qualifications? Where do you draw the line?
I think where you draw the line is the fact that you're either on the same page for the most part or you're not. So I think syncing up-wise with Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson, and they're talking about their relationship being better than it ever has been and all that kind of stuff. To me, I honestly do believe that they are in sync. And Waldron just kind of adds to that kind of and solidifies that whole thing, because I really do believe, especially after this year, that Russell Wilson and Shane Waldron will be completely married, because I think that's how well this scheme is going to work. And so as far as personnel decisions, why not let your quarterback, if you kind of have the same philosophy, why not let your quarterback have a little bit of input, at least perception wise, internally as an organization, because you're going to pick the same type of guys anyway. And if they have those sorts of relationships that are built, during the off season and outside of football and so forth, and Russ thinks that this player would be ideally suited for this role, I would listen to that. Would you not? I mean, you've talked about at what point, or do you ever allow a player to have any input? My question is, why wouldn't you?
Because you're giving that power to one player, but not.
But it would have to be a special player.
True, but would you give Bobby Wagner say about?
Yeah, I would actually. And Pete has said that, Bobby and him have conversations about players all the time. It doesn't mean that they go that direction, but he listens to that. And I would imagine there have been players where that has occurred that we have brought in. I don't know for sure, but
I mean, okay, you can have those conversations and that, but I think Russell Wilson, the stories are that he was trying to assert more than just,
this is the guy I want. If I don't get him in, I'm going to cause
not quite that problems. Strong, but just he was saying a year ago, we need to add weapons, and he brought up Antonio Brown, and the team kind of looked and then didn't. And then it turns out that Brown went to Tampa, won a Super Bowl, and
you think that's what caused the specific questions in the offseason? That move or lack of?
I think that's part of it, because I think Wilson was being more forceful in terms of his attempted influence than I think Pete Carroll was comfortable with. And Wilson was continuing to try and exert some of that control. And you're like, okay, you'll do that with a special player. Okay, so I just looking at quarterbacks, right? So does winning a Super Bowl, does that have to be the requirement? So then would Joe Flacco have had say in Baltimore over stuff?
Not necessarily, Keith.
You know what I mean? So it's like
But Russell Wilson is not Joe Flacco.
You're right, he's not. But what about Matthew Stafford? Does he get input?
Well, he may. And the reason that I say that is because a guy like Matthew Stafford has spent his entire years in the NFL with one team, one organization, different coaches, but nonetheless brings a perspective that I, as a coach, if I was Sean McVay, I'd be like all over the place on that guy. Like, he would become my new best friend. I would understand the ins and outs of what he's thinking, how he thinks, what his makeup is, who he thinks he would work well with. And I would try to bring at least one or two of those guys onto my roster so my quarterback is confident. I just think that's just part of the process. I think these relationships that like head coaches have with their quarterbacks or offensive coordinators are much closer than we even really think about. I mean, these guys are like every day they're spending together and they're constantly thinking about strategy, the way stuff works, who would work well with them, who do they have a good rapport with that might not be on the team that if added could. I just think that dynamic is always a part of the mix.
Yeah. I mean, okay. I look at the situation in Green Bay with Rodgers.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's terrible. And
it sounds like he's going to play for them this year, but he's got kind of an out after that.
Yeah. And it's a complete mess. And so
and now that's a situation where I would not let him have that sort of control, because now your entire organization is in jeopardy. You've got one guy trying to control the entire narrative in a negative way. To me, that's not the Russell Wilson situation, at least the way it's been portrayed internally. Like, I'm talking about the relationship between coach and player. Externally, yeah, it looks the same. You just mentioned that, but it wasn't the same.
Well, but the thing is that if you look at it, like, what does Rodgers want? Rodgers wants to be heard in the same way that you're talking about Russell Wilson being heard. And being a part of things. And instead, he feels like he was shut out. But given Rodgers' career in Green Bay, Super Bowl, MVPs.
And being so close that he's so competitive, I get it. I understand.
Like, hasn't he earned the same level of input that Wilson has?
He may have earned it, but he may have earned it from a different coaching staff.
Okay, but so you're going to come in as a new coach.
That's not what I would do.
And tell a guy like that Rodgers that you have to re-earn it.
It does take two to play. I mean, you've got to have a guy in Rodgers have the same sort of openness to work with a new regime. If he's got his way and he's shutting folks out, I don't know what's going on. I'm not privy to that information. I'm just saying the behavior says that they're not on the same page. And why is that? And that would be, to me, that the reason is that both sides failed to come together in the middle somewhere. And, that's where they're at. And it's, it's bad news for them. It's okay this year because they're going to get it. He's professional enough. He's going to give them everything he's got for this year, but he's definitely gone next year, which opens that whole thing up. And the NFC up, in fact, which is good for Seattle.
Well, and I mean, you say that he's going to give him everything he's got, but
he's professional. Well, he's not committed at all. He's done, one and done. He's one and done. Does that affect the ability of the team to rally around him and try to get to another Super Bowl? No, I don't think so. I think that the team rallies around him and he gives them everything he's got, and he's a professional. But that little teeny thing, though, that you just hit up on, the chemistry is shattered. So sometimes that's the difference between a Super Bowl team and a team that's one and done in the offseason.
Okay, what if Rodgers has a bad game early or the team starts off a little slow, gets banged up on defense, and people are thinking, well, Rodgers is done after this year anyway. Why don't we get Love in there and get him some reps? And
go out and get a trade deadline compensation package for him?
You're not going to get maybe because he's going to leave as a free agent.
Yeah, you don't have a contract to worry about with him.
So, in that situation, and then people are going to be like, okay, so even if that situation doesn't come up, it's still a possibility that it will. And so there will be people in the locker room thinking about it, talking about it. Some of them might be like, I'm late in my career. I don't want that to even be an option. Other people will be like, look, I'm here for 3 more years. If our ability to win a Super Bowl is dependent on Love next year, let's get him in there now and get him ready. And so there's going to be, you create rifts in your locker room when you have situations like that. So Green Bay has handled it poorly from the beginning. And I don't think Rodgers has handled it great, but the franchise has handled it poorly from the beginning. And it's just a mess. It's just an absolute mess. And I think that you've got a situation that is very problematic for that franchise in a year where they should be either the favorite to go to the Super Bowl or number 2, depending on how you view Tampa.
Do you think that slides a little bit just based on the way that they've approached the last 3 weeks?
Absolutely. I'd put them 4th.
Where do you think Seattle falls into that group?
3rd.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about this, but that's actually a little higher than I would have initially thought from you.
Interesting.
I was thinking 5th. Not for me personally. I'm to be a little higher, but realistically, I thought that they would be in at least a top 5 conversation for us. But the league says that they're not even top 10.
Well, we're talking about in just the NFC because it's to represent the Super Bowl or represent the NFC.
Yes,
in the Super Bowl.
Exactly.
And so you don't think they're top 10 in the NFC?
Yeah, I know. Not me. I'm just saying that other folks. I mean, we're finishing last in the NFC West on a few prominent lists, including Prisco, which I don't agree with the guy, but nonetheless, that's what they're thinking out there.
Prisco is very rarely right about things like that, and
True.
often says things just to, be confrontational.
He's not the only one, though.
I know there's a lot of people that do that same kind of thing too, but and then there's a lot of people that are just not informed. They don't recognize the talent because they don't want to.
Yeah, and I think that points to an idea that we have that there might be an opening for a new national show on something like that to talk about different teams and to understand the realities. And
yeah actually, there is a void out there for a good and national full NFL show with guys attempting to get to the bottom of these things and not just fall into the national media narrative.
Yeah.
We should probably try and fill that.
Yeah, I think so.
That's a good idea.
Announcements to come soon. Or we can just talk about it. We've already kind of talked about it. Do you want
to? Sure. Bill and I are talking about putting that show together. It'll be a slightly different format, shorter shows, but we want to expand our horizons to talk about more than just the Seahawks, and also expand our knowledge base to be able to talk about more than just the Seahawks.
That plus maybe some changes to our own show. So we're joining a national podcast network. We haven't really kind of announced it yet, but whatever. We've announced it, but I don't know that it actually was really heard. But we're going to join a new national podcast network for this show. Mm-hmm. And we're going to change our format up a little bit. We're going to go from once a week, hour and a half to a 3 time a week show in shorter episodes. And that'll give us a more of an opportunity to look at some ad revenue and also to be out there more consistently multiple times a week.
Well, and also just for you guys listening, you don't have to commit to an hour and a half. You can commit to your 30-minute drive home.
Yes, right.
And listen to a show. So it's a win-win for everybody.
And then on the national thing, we've also been in discussions with the podcast group to create a new show that would focus on all 32 teams, but also really focus on prospects in the NFL draft. I think both Keith and I really like that process. Every time we hit the off season with the Seahawks show, we dive into the NFL draft. So we talk about prospects, position groups in the draft, all that kind of stuff, big boards. It's just a really fun thing for us. And so I think the other show would be kind of for us. And hopefully everyone else enjoys it. Like Keith said, we open ourselves up to other markets as well. And so we're trying to put that together. The initial name of the show is NFL Draft Playbook. And we're still tossing that around a little bit, but I think we're leaning in that direction. So
we're still in the early planning phases.
Yeah, we're looking at probably October.
Yeah, don't expect us to launch this next week.
Yeah.
Anyways,
that's it, Keith.
That's more than it. Let's get out of here.
All right. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I am at NW Seahawk. The show, I might even have to change my Twitter handle, maybe. Otherwise, I'll be a homer. I might have to end up with another Twitter handle completely. I don't know.
Well, also you're NW Seahawk, but you live in Arizona. Shouldn't you be
SW
Seahawk?
I'm all messed up now. No wonder I'm discombobulated as a human being. Find the show at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. Seahawksplaybook.com has all of the shows, has all the website stuff. We redeveloped the website in the last couple months, and it's fantastic. At least I think so. And it kind of takes care of itself. So I rarely even have to get on there anymore and do anything. So that's my thing. So that's it. Listen to us on all your favorite podcast apps, all over, from iHeart to Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc. And find us on our YouTube channel as well at Seahawks Playbook. And that's it. So until next time, Keith, go Hawks.
Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Phil is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.